Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Moore and this is the Pancreatic Cancer Podcast. What do you think about when someone says pancreatic cancer? Probably a terrible, deadly disease which results in inevitable doom. Well, in this podcast, I hope to give you a new perspective of pancreatic cancer from the patient's perspective, who is now a survivor. I would like to start this podcast by giving credit to our main source, which is 100 Questions and Answers About Pancreatic Cancer by Eileen O'Reilly, which provided me with lots of information that I hope to share with you. Pancreatic cancer is the most deadly of all major cancers, and with that, it is quite underfunded. The purpose of this podcast is to raise awareness about the topic of pancreatic cancer, and I hope you learn something new. Pancreatic cancer has, for a long time, been a disease in which doctors shrug their shoulders and accept that the patient is doomed. However, while this may be true in some cases, many diagnosed with this disease can be helped, sometimes significantly. So today we have a survivor with us who I will be interviewing. This is Jason Moore.
Thank you.
So first, let's start with the question, how were you diagnosed?
It was a long process. I had some unusual symptoms for a couple of years, but nothing that would make me think it would be anything like this. But I had seen several doctors and actually wound up, of all places, at a cardiologist. And he checked me out, and of course there was nothing unusual with my heart. But he said I was having strange symptoms, so he sent me to have an MRI done. He thought maybe something be wrong with my adrenal glands. So they did the MRI and they found a small spot in my pancreas. So they sent me to an endocrinologist in Hamilton who told me it was a cyst. And I would say for about 10 months, everyone thought it was just a cyst. It wasn't serious. He sent me to Juravinsky to have a doctor look to see if they should remove the cyst. But because I was considered such a low priority, I didn't get to see that doctor for over 6 months. And it was actually the cardiologist that called and said, can you please get him in as soon as possible? So when I got in there, they did a biopsy. That took about another month. And when the biopsy came back, that was when I found out that it wasn't what they thought it was. And unfortunately, it was pancreatic cancer. But the good news was that while it had grown pretty substantially, it had not spread anywhere.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm really glad that that happened for you. So how did your diagnosis affect you?
It's probably the worst moment of your life. I kind of went into this kind of numbed shock, which is good, so you keep it together.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
The next few days were very hard, but, there was the potential for surgery because it hadn't spread, which made me hopeful. And I think the fact when you have family, loved ones, things like that, I went into the mode that I was going to do everything possible to fight it and to make sure that regardless of what happened, people would be proud of me. So that allowed me to really feel like I had some control in how I behaved and to stay as positive as possible through the experience.
Yeah, that's really brave of you. So were there any signs or symptoms prior to your diagnosis?
Like I said, I felt tired. I'd been to a few doctors because I was taking a bit more time off work than I had my whole life. So there were very subtle things that I never thought cancer in my, not even in my wildest dreams.
Yeah,
in hindsight, I did have one high blood sugar reading on a blood test once, and they actually sent me to a clinic for diabetes. Oh. And I would go there and they would prick my finger, and everything was always normal. And again, I was a bit heavy, so I thought it just had something to do with my weight at the time. But in hindsight, I think that probably was a signal that something was happening with my pancreas.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
So again, it's just one of those things that again, it's hindsight, at the time.
Yeah.
But that was a couple years before even.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, so can you tell us a little bit about your cancer specifically?
It was a solid tumor right at the very head of my pancreas, right at the front. And when it was first found, it was 1.2 centimeters, and then once it was diagnosed about 10, 11 months later, it had grown to approximately 2 centimeters. So a
Right.
little under an inch. And the tricky part about it was that it was, because it was right at the front or head of the pancreas, it was so close to the major artery that runs from your heart down to your hips and feeds all your legs that they couldn't be sure that it wasn't actually attached to the artery. And if that was the case, a standard surgery, what's called a Whipple procedure, wouldn't work. They would have to remove the section of the artery that had the tumor had attached to,
Right,
and that's
right.
an extremely serious operation. And there's only one person in the country who can actually perform that surgery, and he's in Toronto. And so at that time, I got sent to Princess Margaret, and my initial treatment was at Princess Margaret.
Yeah. Yeah, that must be scary, but I'm sure you were glad that you got to be with a really good doctor.
Yes,
So,
yeah. The fact he was willing to take on my case was excellent, and really, again, even from a mental perspective, really helped and made me feel hopeful, because I knew even if it had attached, I still had the potential for surgery, which is the only cure for pancreatic cancer.
yes.
You can't cure pancreatic cancer with radiation or chemotherapy. You have to perform surgery and remove every cell from your body.
Right, right. So, what was your treatment? Like you said, chemo or radiation? Or...
I got the works. Because of how close it was to the artery, they wanted to, before surgery, try to remove it to make it, or try to shrink the tumor so that it would be a simpler standard Whipple procedure. So I received 2 months of chemotherapy, and it was a new chemotherapy cocktail that had been studied in Europe. I found out after the fact that it was actually in clinical trial stages in Canada, which wound up being excellent. And they did a CAT scan after the third chemotherapy dose, and the tumor had already shrunk.
Wow.
Then I was given, I was supposed to get 6 weeks of radiation after the chemotherapy, again to try to weaken the tumor and really shore up the boundaries.
Right, right.
So I had that, and I had 5 weeks of the radiation, and then I wound up getting a fever. I think my body started to kind of give out. So I had 5 weeks, but they said that was over 90% of the treatment, so it was adequate. And then I had the actual Whipple procedure. I met with the surgeon, and he was very optimistic that it wouldn't have to require removing part of the artery. They wouldn't be 100% sure until they actually performed the surgery, but they did perform the surgery. They said the tumor came out quite easily. They didn't need to take out the artery.
That's
And I was given 2 months to recover from the surgery, which was successful. They looked at 13 lymph nodes around the tumor, and they all came back negative. So as far as they could tell, they got everything. And then because pancreatic is such an aggressive type of cancer, everyone who gets the surgery, regardless of the outcome, then gets quite a long dose of chemotherapy post-surgery. So I had 8 doses of chemotherapy after the surgery.
Wow.
So all told, everything took almost a full year of treatment, and that ended about, I guess, a little over a month ago.
Wow. I mean, I know that's hard, but I'm sure that you're grateful for that, because that probably helps with
Yes,
your...
it was a tough year, definitely. It was a very hard year, but again, you're happy to go through it, given that is the only way to cure pancreatic cancer.
Of
You're
course,
happy
yeah.
to have undergone it. So
Yeah.
yeah, and now to be out the other end is, as scary as it is, it's also exciting, because
Yeah, of course.
it's a hard year.
So, your condition currently must be pretty decent?
Yes, as of, I've had 2 CAT scans since the surgery, and both have not found any cancer in my body. The
That's awesome.
blood tests have shown, for the markers, have shown within the below the threshold to show that there's cancer in the body. So as far as anyone could tell, I'm cancer free now. I'll probably be getting regular CAT scans for several years. I'm not sure how
Right.
long, but one of the downsides of pancreatic cancer is that I'll probably be getting tests
Yeah.
probably the rest of my life, I would think. But they're in, I think, 30% of cases of the Whipple procedure, it's considered a cure. So I'm hoping I fall into that group.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure since especially you're young and you had before it was only 2 centimeters and it hadn't spread. So that
Yes,
probably gives
yeah.
you.
I was lucky that it was in stage one still. It didn't grow quite as fast as they expected, and when they did the pathology report, they said it was a stage one but grade two, so it wasn't quite as differentiated. The look of the tumor, it wasn't as the cells weren't quite as abnormal as you would think. So the studies I've read, the biggest issue with pancreatic cancer is how aggressive is the tumor,
Right.
which is something that we really can't control. It's, unfortunately, and in my case, I think I was very fortunate in
Yes,
that it
yes.
was a less aggressive form of cancer, and of pancreatic cancer, and for that reason, I think I was very fortunate.
Yes,
and,
yeah.
And so far, I've had a very good result.
That's really good. So, lastly, what do you think should be done to improve results?
From what I've read, the biggest issue with pancreatic cancer, and again, it's got, as you mentioned, horrible statistics.
Yeah.
And so when I was first diagnosed, you Google pancreatic cancer, and it's just awful. But it's not a magic cancer. It operates like other
Right.
forms. The big issue, I think, similar to ovarian, is that it shows no symptoms or no obvious symptoms until it's spread to other parts of the body.
Yeah.
So once it's in stage 3 or 4, you can't really do anything. And to be honest, that's the case with a lot of cancers. The later stages, it's very hard to treat.
Yeah.
It's just that they're diagnosed more often in stage 1 and 2. So the big issue, I think, with pancreatic cancer is early detection. And one of the studies I saw kind of indicated that there are some subtle signals, like I mentioned, like
Yeah.
a strange blood sugar test, things like that. So I think there needs to be more testing, more, looking for those possible symptoms. And if someone in their 40s or 50s all of a sudden shows an unusual reading in their blood tests, give them, look and see, give them a CAT scan or an MRI and see if anything's going on.
Yeah, of
Because if you
course,
can
yeah.
catch it before it spreads, it is treatable. And, it's an aggressive form regardless, but it can be cured. And, it's funny, you watch TV shows and things like that, and it's kind of treated like a death sentence. And it's really
Yeah.
not if you can catch it early enough. So I think that's one of the big things. As I mentioned, I was given a new cocktail of chemotherapy drugs, which has just been, the clinical trial just ended just a few months ago. And I think that's positive. It seems to
Yeah.
have better results. So, if they keep doing research on treatment options, I think that'll be good as well. And hopefully
Right.
we can get it so that the cure rates are higher, and, maybe get it up to some other forms of cancer so that it's not considered this horrible, awful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. I totally agree with what you said. So thank you very much, Jason, for being here. I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, as it takes someone really brave to be able to open up about something like this. So thank you. And also, thank you for tuning into this podcast. This has been the Pancreatic Cancer Podcast. I'm Sarah Moore. Thank you for listening.